to avoid arrest. The final chart shows the percentage of trans folks who avoided care because of fear of mistreatment, including folks who did not have IDs that matched their current name and gender. And I want to make a note that 68% of transgender and non-binary folks do not have any ID that matches their current name and gender. So again, thinking about institutional forms of transphobia, thinking about barriers to access to care, if 68% of the transgender and non-binary population does not have identification that matches their current name and gender identity, how does that present itself as a barrier? And how does that work with our electronic health records, our forms, etc.? This pie chart shows the same statistics, but for Arizona. So 74% experiencing violence K through 12. We have 35% experiencing violence when accessing public accommodations, 53% police violence, and then 33% healthcare. So as stated previously, the statistics for BIPOC transgender populations increase. So in Los Angeles or in Tongva land, there we go. It's like I need my computer to work with me. In Los Angeles or in Tongva land, there's an organization called the Los Angeles Transmasculine Health Justice, which is an organization that calls attention to serious health inequities impacting transmasculine people in Los Angeles. They engaged in a participatory research that generated this report. So 90% of the transmasculine folks of color that they polled, 90% delayed healthcare in 2017, 51% did so due to depression, 48% due to anxiety related to past care, and 45% due to fear of mistreatment based on gender identity. So thinking back to some of the slides I showed previously, we went from 33% of delaying care to 90% when we break it down and add race and ethnicity into the mix. We went from 62% to 51% around depression, and then from 33% to 45% of fear of mistreatment when trying to access care. What this illustrates is why developing and serving programs to transgender clients really need to be done through an intersectional approach, intersectional lens, and also understanding the implication or the impact of minority stress, which also has a heavier health burden for transgender and gender expansive populations. So I want to pause here, and I would love to hear from all of you. After hearing some of these statistics, what does this tell us about the experiences of transgender people? Feel free to unmute, or you can place it in the chat.
All right, so people are probably typing. So in chat, what does this tell us? These sobering statistics that Zami is sharing with us.
And also,
many obstacles. So Sydney's saying many obstacles to overcome. Needs are still not addressed. Pedro says there's still much work to do. Yes, much work to do. Others utilize that chat function. Janice.
Hi, Patrick. Hi,
Please,
Zami.
Allison. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. Honestly, I thank you so much for showing the comparisons between Arizona and California. This was honestly quite surprising to me. I mean, California, we're here in the Bay Area, and you would think we would be more welcoming and accepting. And I was very surprised by that our numbers are very comparable to Arizona, a red state, a very conservative state. So I think that this is definitely a huge wake-up call, and I'm very grateful for this data, because this is, I mean, it's interesting. It's almost like California is more dangerous because, people might come here and think, oh yeah, like people are going to be more welcoming, but like what the data is showing. So this is really important. So thank you for this.
Can I also add that it's amazing the statistics you gave about the identification being such an issue. That kind of really highlights how some of the stuff that us cis folks just take for granted, like getting on an airplane, going somewhere, cashing a check, can be such a bad experience. Let me just say, it's just a bad experience, and I'm sure much worse than that.
Certainly, thank you. And then Zami, just to let you know, overwhelmingly in the chat, people are saying that we have a lot more work to do, that these statistics are disturbing. Yeah, that's the general feeling. So
thank you.
yeah.
Yes, thank you all for those responses. And I just want to circle back to the I didn't catch your name, but the one speaking about being in the Bay Area and
Allison?
Allison, thank you so much. So, what you highlighted, Allison, I lived in the Bay briefly. I'm originally from Southern California, but I lived in the Bay briefly. And one of the things that I noticed when living in the Bay is that, yes, there's a large trans and non-binary and gender expansive community and population. However, the institutions, so the structures of accessing care, is not as liberal. And we'll get into some of that later on. But thinking about if you have to go to a doctor's appointment, and again, your identification does not match your presentation, your name, etc. It doesn't matter if you're in California, Arizona, or Mississippi. Almost every single electronic health record or clinic, health department, et cetera, requires some form of identification. And so some of it's about, again, shifting your organizational structure so that people can access the services they need, right? And so although California offers gender affirming care and surgeries as part of the public health, the systems that allow access to it has not caught up with some of the really amazing gender affirming policies, right? And so that's why we're breaking down or deconstructing institutionalized transphobia to see how even when we have these amazing policies, if we haven't broken down the systems in which they operate in and deconstructed that to be more affirming, then those who really need access to care do not receive the access, right? So I really thank you, Allison, for bringing that up. I just want to add that this highlights that from an early age, many members of the transgender and non-binary communities are disproportionately impacted by the prejudices in which the systems and institutions they live in operate, which leads me to go a little deeper about institutionalized transphobia and how it shows up. So there's a lot of commonly discussed ways that we institutionalize transphobia, such as not having gender neutral restrooms, not having gender affirming forms, and not putting pronouns in signature lines or name badges, all of which can potentially demoralize or have a negative impact on transgender persons accessing your services, right? However, there are other practices that are very common and often overlooked. And so the first I want to highlight is hiring practices. So again, I would love for you all to keep the social determinants of health in mind and those 6 spears, right? One of them being unemployment, overrepresentation in the underground market. So with hiring practices, one of the things I want to ask you all are we requiring bachelor's and master's degrees for entry-level positions? Or requiring background checks for positions that don't require fingerprint clearance or working with vulnerable populations? Are you only hiring transgender people to be in roles that only work with other transgender people? And when hiring transgender people, are you doing so with the understanding that they may need you to invest more in their training and professional development due to some of the social disparities that we discussed? Also, when we're hiring transgender people, are we only hiring white transgender folks? What does your organizational makeup look like from race, gender, class, educational background, etc.? So those are some questions I would love for you all to sit with and think about, particularly those of you who are on hiring committees, who are managers, higher ups, etc. Are these things that you all are practicing, and are they really necessary to the job in which you're hiring for? The next point is our dress code policies and procedures. So dress code policies and procedures are often based in white, cisnormative, binary expectations of what is professional attire. Dress code policies are often used to reprimand or discipline transgender employees and not promote them under the guise of not being professional. So when in actuality, it has nothing to do with whether or not they're dressing professionally or not, but it has to do with transphobia and a mix of potentially racism and xenophobia. There's a difference between not dressing professionally and someone being uncomfortable with the way in which someone expresses their gender and whether that meets their standards and expectations. Dress code, like hiring practices, is another place where taking an intersectional lens will play a role. For example, does your dress code policy say things such as no hoop earrings, no bright colors or patterns, and hair must be groomed and neat? I intentionally picked these common dress code policy statements because for Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and other communities of color, many of these prohibitions are banning natural hair and traditional garments. So if you have a two-spirit employee who would like to wear traditional jewelry or clothing, if it has bright colors or patterns on it, they are unable to wear it at work. Same goes for a Black trans woman who may be wearing a dashiki and has free growing locks, or a Latinx trans man who is growing his beard and may not be able to keep it well kept in accordance with your policy. So again, when we're thinking about institutionalized transphobia, as well as institutionalized racism and other forms of marginalization and oppression, we have to think, are these things necessary? Are these in alignment with equity? And in what ways are we creating these policies through what lens, right? The next point I want to bring up is programming. Majority of transgender programming is focused on sexual behavior change for transgender women. For example, PrEP, condom uses, etc. Seldom do we see programming for transgender populations in their entirety, meaning includes transmasculine and non-binary individuals, nor do we see programming that is based in life development skills, for example, career and professional development, holistic wellness such as nutrition, exercise, and mindfulness practices, financial literacy skills, or comprehensive sexual health programming that also speaks to pleasure and not just risk reduction. Next are healthcare screenings or health screenings. Health screenings need to be comprehensive, meaning asking universal questions around sexual behavior without making assumptions. So if you're going to offer an anal swab to a transgender woman or ask if she has anal penetration, we also need to ask and offer the same to AFAB transgender people, meaning offering to transgender men and non-binary transgender people. When we hyper focus on the sexual behavior of one part of the transgender community, but completely ignore the potential behavior of another, we're engaging in transphobia as well as misogyny. And then lastly, separating gender-affirming care and HIV care. We know from recent research that when we offer and provide gender-affirming care services, for example, hormone therapy, as part of HIV care and prevention treatment, that adherence goes up. We see more transgender clients taking their retroviral medication, and we see more transgender people accessing preventative care such as PrEP. We know you do not have to specialize in hormones to write the prescription, which is why many PCPs are able to do so. When we talk about wanting to end the HIV epidemic, we have to look at all of the barriers that contribute to people not accessing care. So that means we must address organizational transphobia through looking at our practices, making sure that we're not giving the message that we are only trying to fix transgender people, namely transgender women of color, but we are investing and attempting to elevate and support through our actions. So before I continue to strategies for change, I would love to see what questions do you all have or comments. Feel free to unmute or place it in the chat. And I actually found the chat, Patrick. So I saw a comment from Rachel, and Rachel put the intersections of structural oppression require the health system to have more than just LGBTQ providers. We need this, folks, and an anti-racist and affirming space for people with disabilities and those with socially marginalized identities. Yes, Rachel, thank you so much. Absolutely. We often try to separate based off of identities and making it seem as though communities are monoliths. Transgender folks are not a monolith. My experience as a Black transgender man from Inglewood, California, living in Tucson, Arizona, is vastly different from a Latinx or a Latina transgender woman born in Brooklyn who might be living in Milwaukee, right? Completely different. And so we absolutely need to be able to look at gender, look at race, look at ability, disabilities, as well as neurodivergence, right? So thank you so much, Rachel. What other comments or questions do we have? Please feel free to unmute. Okay. So if we are good, we're going to move on and begin to discuss the different ways that institutionalized transphobia shows up. So now that we've discussed the different ways that institutionalized transphobia shows up, I want us to talk about the strategies for change. So review hiring and dress code policies and procedures. Get technical assistance where someone can sit with you and really review your policies and procedures. Why do you ask for background checks? Do you really need a master's or bachelor's degree to do community outreach, prep navigation, or finger prick testing? Really examine why your policies are what they are and how they can be pushing out potential employees who could really support and elevate your organization. You know, I want to go back to Rachel's comment where it's not just good enough to just have LGBTQ providers, because one, we need to acknowledge that just because someone's lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer does not mean that they're always gender affirming or trans affirming. Some of the most horrific experiences I've had in a doctor's office has been from members of the LGBTQ community. So it's not just good enough to have someone who is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer, but are we hiring transgender and gender expansive folks? And are we hiring them from different backgrounds, right? And are we creating qualifications that are unnecessary? Most of the entry-level positions do not require master's degrees, bachelor's degrees, etc. So a model for this I want to highlight is Gender Health San Francisco. They hire transgender non-binary community members for several positions within their clinic. For positions that require an advanced degree, for example, clinicians, they do require proof of degree and licensure. However, for patient navigator positions, they do not require advanced degrees, but require lived experience and an understanding of navigating the public healthcare system so that they can navigate that process with and for their clients. Another example is Sonora Prevention Works in Phoenix, Arizona, and Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation in Tucson, Arizona, all who have hiring practices of hiring from the community, including folks who may have a criminal background, which is important because there are several non-binary and transgender community members who have a criminal record through engaging in survival and harm reductive strategies that have been criminalized, but they must utilize these strategies in order to get their basic needs met due to discrimination and oppression that they face. Another example is reviewing your healthcare policies. And there are 2 points that I want to make here. One, if your organization has a wait period, say 30 to 90 days, or in some cases more, before your new employee can access the organizational health benefits, I recommend you removing that wait period. Going back to thinking about the beginning of the presentation where we discussed health disparities in the social political context, almost half of the transgender and non-binary population that was surveyed has delayed preventative care due to mistreatment, or they do not have health insurance due to employment discrimination or discrimination when attempting to access healthcare resources. So when you are hiring a transgender or non-binary person, this might be the first time they are eligible or have easier access to health insurance and healthcare and can actually get their needs met. So changing your policy to make it easier for employees, especially those who come from communities that have higher health disparities, will actually help with employee retention, satisfaction, and production, because they now can address health needs that may be well overdue. Secondly, is do a thorough investigation on gender affirming care options in your policy. For example, it is great to offer and cover gender affirming care as part of your benefits package and as part of the state's public healthcare system, but have you asked what it all covers? There are several options for hormone therapy, for example. There are injections, pills, patches, creams, etc. But only some are covered by employee health benefits most of the time. Do you know what forms of hormone therapy your benefits cover versus what your employees use? The same goes for surgery. Does your health benefits cover revisions? Do they only cover vaginoplasty instead of just an orchiectomy? And if there are barriers and challenges for your employee or even a client in accessing these services, who is designated to help facilitate the resolution? If you're not sure, I recommend going back and looking through the policy to make sure that you have a comprehensive gender affirming care package and not just the basics. Also, that you have a staff person who is well-versed in educating and accessing gender affirming benefits to help your employee or clients navigate the system when there is a problem. We have organizations who have patient navigators, but we also need employee navigators to assist and ease the burden. The next point is job skills development. Create programming that directly addresses economic disparities that go beyond resume building and housing referrals. This can be a job skills development program similar to Trans Can Work based in Aurora Hills, California, and the Transgender Employment Program in San Francisco. Both of these organizations assist with resume building, but they also have employee referral services, job postings, hiring and network events, on-site coaching and training for transgender and non-binary community members, and hire other transgender and non-binary professionals to run these programs and do the coaching and mentoring. It's very important to have equitable representation in all areas of your organization. So having an underhoused, underemployed, transgender team come in, need support for building their resume, they walk into the room and they see someone who looks like them, has a powerful impact on that individual. So really hiring folks from the community and taking on the motto, we are the community that we serve. Next is community safety. The statistics showed us that there is quite a bit of mistrust when it comes to accessing services for the transgender and non-binary community, and for good reason. What some clinics have done nationally is create designated clinic hours for the transgender and non-binary community to access services. For example, in Oakland, California, there is a gender affirming clinic at Kaiser Permanente, which offers certain hours where their OBGYN clinic is only open to the transgender and non-binary community, which is great. And for patients who work during those hours or may be afraid of being outed, this may pose as a barrier. It is great to want to create a safe space, but we have to go beyond creating safe spaces or hours, but create safe clinics, meaning having visible anti-discrimination signs, having staff and employees trained to disrupt transphobic behavior when witnessed, and if that staff person doesn't, have an actual accountability and disciplinary process that views not intervening when transphobia happens as passively engaging in transphobia and requiring disciplinary action. So it's not good enough anymore for us to say, we have safe spaces, we have these designated hours, we need to be able to create safer clinics, we need our employees to actually intervene, and when they don't intervene, understand that they contributed to the violence that that person experienced as well. Okay. So next in strategies for change, create wellness programs that are holistic, okay? So programs that teach transgender and gender expansive communities how to care for themselves outside of just PrEP and sexual health screenings. For example, Kindred Connections in Tucson, Arizona holds wellness workshops for transgender and non-binary Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and other people of color that focuses on eating nutritious and healthful foods on a budget, strategies for caring for mental and emotional health when you don't have access to a therapist, as well as engaging in art and other expressions of joy. Gender Health SF also had wellness programs for their clients prior to the pandemic that provided them holistic ways to prepare and recover from surgery. This included educating around nutrition, the impacts.
Like really crazy cookie, so it's intense, and also has peanuts.
I think someone's on mute. If you can mute yourself, that would be wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So that included educating around nutrition, the impacts of stress, that stress has on healing from surgery, and how to build your surgery recovery team. And I really want to highlight that piece around the surgery recovery team. As clinics, health departments, and organizations serving transgender and non-binary folks, it is great to access affirming surgeries and care as part of your program. And it is great to have navigators who are transgender and non-binary as well. And how are you ensuring that your patients are not just having surgery, but are recovering as safely and easefully as possible? Part of having holistic programming is also having an interdisciplinary team that can help address barriers to care. For example, if you are now offering gender affirming surgery, you're engaging in an informed consent model, and you are engaging in a informed consent model. You have a homeless or underhoused transgender patient getting phalloplasty or vaginoplasty. Where are they going to recover after the surgery? Right? So it's great that we're supporting this person who is underhoused to get their surgery that's gender affirming and it's going to increase their quality of life. But where are they going to recover? Do you have a social worker or a case manager assigned to them to help find housing, at least for that 6 to 8 week recovery period, and sometimes longer? When writing for funding, did you include housing for recovery? Do you also have a behavioral or mental health specialist to support feelings of grief, stress, or anxiety that happens post-surgery that many people do not talk about? What about someone supporting the client and adjusting to their new body? Right? Which takes me to my next point, which is comprehensive sexual health programming. Have sexual health programming that has discussions around pleasure and exploration, partner negotiation, and what is sex like post-surgery. An example of this is Trans Life at San Francisco AIDS Foundation. Part of their programming is bringing in transgender and non-binary sexual health educators to talk about pleasure, play, and exploring your body post-surgery. The transgender community is hypersexualized as well as hyperstigmatized, and majority of conversations around trans sex is about STI and HIV prevention, sex work, and assault, all of which are important conversations to have. And how are we as health departments, clinics, and nonprofits supporting our transgender and non-binary community and enjoying life and sex? Majority of people are sexual beings, and normalizing talking about sex in affirming ways, pleasurable ways, and consensual ways helps those who may be struggling with consent, who may be struggling with advocating or negotiating with partners, practice those skills. This also leads to stronger sexual health practices such as condom and lube usage. For example, the Eon Youth Lounge in Tucson, Arizona would host weekly sex chats for their participants that included conversations about how lube made sex more pleasurable, while simultaneously educating them about how lube also reduces friction and potential tissue tearing during intercourse. And lastly, for strategies of change, before I open it back up for comments and questions, is integrated HIV care. So again, multidisciplinary teams for our communities is so important. These teams can include providers who provide both HIV care as well as gender affirming care, social workers to help clients who may be experiencing food scarcity or unemployment or even violence, as well as behavioral health specialists. For example, at Valleywise Hospital in Phoenix, Arizona, when there's a patient who is newly diagnosed or re-entering into care after not being in care for several years, they see a social worker or behavioral health specialist. They are assigned a case manager, are screened for other needs such as nutrition benefits and housing, and if they are transgender, are assigned to one of their providers who provides both HIV treatment as well as hormone therapy, removing barriers that often lead to people falling out of care. They have institutionalized integrated care by creating a multidisciplinary team, which in my opinion, should be standard practice throughout the country. So when we are able to approach working with the transgender community and really any community with the intersectional lens, what we are doing is investing in the whole person. By addressing institutionalized transphobia, we can make our organizations and clinics safer for transgender people, which will begin to address the social determinants discussed in the beginning, and also create safer clinics for every single person who is accessing that clinic. So with that, I am going to stop screen sharing so that I can see all of your beautiful faces and answer any questions you all have, as well as comments. I would love dialogue. Okay, it looks like some folks are familiar with SAFE, with Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation, Tucson. Timo said that he volunteered with them for 6 years. Awesome. And then we have another comment, how to shift hormone therapy from endocrinologist to PCP's appointment waits much longer. Yes, absolutely. So some people do, if you want to receive hormone therapy, a lot of folks will send you to an endo. It is not necessary to go to an endo. If you are a PCP and you prescribe any type of medication, you can prescribe hormone therapy. You can run the labs. There's no need to send gender expansive folks to a specialist when you could take care of it right then and there on your own.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I actually work for Bay Area Community Health, and we have a transgender clinic in Fremont as well. And we serve people throughout the whole Bay Area. And we do have primary care, gender affirming care as well. We help out with hormones, PEP, all that navigation and case management services as well. So thank you for bringing that up. It's definitely, makes it more easily accessible to the community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Allison.
Another thing that occurs to me that I was just having a discussion about is that a lot of your syringe services programs, they may have injection equipment and things for, injection drug type things, but do they carry hormone injection equipment? Certainly we know that that's an issue. And so those are some structural things that come to my mind when I think about, creating more trans-friendly and appropriate services.
Thank you so much, Patrick. That's actually an excellent point. Again, so Sonora Prevention works in Tucson, Arizona, or in Phoenix, Arizona. They're actually statewide. They do offer some hormone needles for clients. We recently did a training with them maybe a month or so ago that helped them really deepen different strategies around it. So for example, we talked about how it's great for people to have information on how to treat an abscess, but does that information also include safer injection for hormone therapy, how to reduce abscesses when you are injecting your hormones, as well as are you shifting the injection site? Right. So people do a lot of information around how to safely do intravenous injection, but not always intramuscular or even sub-Q. And so including that information. For folks who are PrEP navigators or who have PrEP programs, it's wonderful to have information or a pamphlet on PrEP, but do you have a pamphlet on PrEP and the way in which PrEP may or may not interact with estrogen or progesterone or testosterone, right? So really thinking, you know, what Anshe said earlier, thinking bigger, better, and broader, right? So it's great to have these programs, but how are you intentionally connecting it to the gender expansive community, particularly if you have someone who may not be out about being trans, but knows that they need or want that information. They can see the pamphlet or flyer, they can grab it, and then they know that you're a safe person to come out to and have a deeper conversation around the different services you all access or you all provide so they can access.
So any questions? There's a question in chat. Where would we be able to get particular pamphlets?
So honestly, you would have to create some of those. So there, you'd have to, or you can get technical assistance, right? So Patrick mentioned that California Prevention Training Center provides technical assistance. We at Denver Prevention Training Center, we also provide technical assistance. I'm their gender affirming care project manager. And so that would be something that my team and I can create for you all. So providing technical assistance or receiving technical assistance, or you all creating the pamphlet on your own are all great ways to do that. And then we have another comment. I really appreciate your comment about when staff don't intervene, when they witness transphobia in their workspaces, they are passively contributing to transphobia. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.
So speak up. Speak up.